work that we do at Generation Rent, and there's so many different ways that renter stories shape our work. And some of you, I can see in the chat, I recognize you, and I know that you've been involved in some of these things before. So yeah, since then, you know, renters have come forward to do all sorts of things. In the COVID, it was throughout the sort of pandemic, Generation Rent set up a new website called Rent Your Rent that allowed people to talk about the everyday experiences that they were facing in the pandemic, whether that was something like people struggling to socially distance in a shared house, or struggling to pay the rent, or landlords not respecting isolation, the good and the bad. And we were able to take those stories to Parliament. We were able to have members of Parliament read out renters' stories directly and have an influence on the debate, and have an influence on the policy, which was the government banning evictions for nearly 12 months. And it was really, like, we would, as a small organisation, Generation Rent, there's no way we would have been able to do that without the voices of renters. You know, we've had people like amazing renter spokespeople talk about their experiences on national news. We've had people come together on Twitter. I mean, there's so many ways that you can get involved in it. And I think it's so valuable for us as renters to learn from each other's experiences and find out how to get support. And also, yeah, as Ruby said, find out if other people are experiencing the same thing, and to learn things from each other. And yeah, I just want to reassure everyone that, you know, that we'd never kind of share any of your details without consent, and we'd never put anyone in a position that they don't want to be in. But this is just a space to share experiences that you face as renters. Hopefully find out we can direct you to appropriate support, but also, yeah, learn from each other and kind of just have an open discussion really about the renting crisis. And what I would say is it's just such an important time to be doing this, because the government at the minute are working on proposals to reform renting, to hopefully ban unfair evictions and make it fairer. And what we will be doing, Generation Rent, will be, you know, writing up all of our events this week, and writing up things that people say anonymously, obviously, and using that to shape the debate. So yeah, I'm not gonna, I think no one came to this event to like hear from me. So without further ado, I will hand over to you guys and just see if anyone wants to open the floor with a bit of a discussion about how renting has affected them. Don't let the scare.
I think, is Amy able to start speaking? I think.
Hi.
Hello. So I very much am trying to be involved in everything I can about this subject around renting. I grew up in council homes, and then because of the bedroom tax, it was really difficult after I went to university. My mum couldn't keep that house. And because of that, and because of the bedroom tax and how wearing that was on people in social housing around that time, she eventually had to live in assisted living. And then, so we didn't have that home. And that means there's no like home in my family. Like there's no fallback. And, you know, there are so many stories when it comes to renting that we can understand, like very tangible, what the issue is. So, you know, it's overpriced, there's mold and things like that. And getting evicted and the more obvious stuff. But for me, and the stuff that has impacted me so much, and so many of the people that I know, is there is such an emotional and mental toll on not having a home, and not having even a sense of community. And this is like kept me really, really small over my life. And so I know that this is going to be like happening to so many of us, and we don't even get to have that conversation, because there's so much to deal with prior to that, like you know, dealing with mold and the extortionate rents. But like something that bothers me quite a lot is the mental toll that having to constantly move, having to find other people to take rooms in your shared accommodation, where it doesn't seem to be a landlord's responsibility to even do the thing that's bringing in the money. And that has such a massive impact on people like me and friends that I know, on just like trying to navigate life. And this stuff, like for me personally, not having a fallback home has kept me really small as a writer, has stopped me from, and an actor, has stopped me from being able to take the opportunities or do the opportunities that I think other people had available to them. And that was purely down to the cost of renting versus the cost of like an average job, for example, and the differences in how much it costs. But really, like, the biggest impact that all of this has had on me is it's kept me in relationships that I shouldn't have been in, and it's kept me in a lot of fear, and that's stopped me from using some of my talents and skills. So this stuff is really important, because I really think this is changing like the course of like a whole like nation of people, and a lot of us aren't able to kind of, home is like the very basic of needs, and when we don't have that, it's stopping a lot of us from being able to achieve. And when people who make decisions in Parliament have houses and have homes, they really don't understand these little nuances. So yeah, it's something that's really important to me, and something I really want to like have other people, I really want to hear like when other people talk about that, because I get that stuff is bad, like in terms of, it's awful in terms of, you know, the rent and the damp and awful things like this, but this is like these are our lives that it's hard to actually navigate when you don't have home. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you, Amy, so much for kicking us off with that. I think you touched on some really important points there that even, you know, we can discuss a lot of the logistic issues around housing, but at its core, it's like an incredibly emotional subject, and it affects so many aspects of life. You know, just bringing up the relationship thing is such an interesting thing. You know, opportunities in work, it's really, you know, people talk about things like unpaid internships or whatever, which are unfair, but ultimately that's a housing conversation, right? Like the reason why people can afford to work unpaid a lot of the time is because they have somewhere to live for free, or they can pursue something creative that doesn't have a high income because they're living in their parents' flat or something. And I think it's a really interesting thing to start the conversation with. So thank you. Does anyone else have any other, you know, experiences similar to that they maybe wanted to bring up? Yeah, Louise, I just saw you raise your hand.
Yeah, hi, absolutely. And I would just say thank you to Amy, because you've just basically described my life. I'm now in my mid-50s and haven't had, grew up in a council house. My parents unfortunately bought it, but my dad, people often don't talk about this, my dad was made redundant, and we lost my parents had to move up north. So I haven't had a secure home since I was 15. I'm mid-50s now, and my daughter is repeating, you know, we've been in private rented accommodation, and I have my whole life since I was sort of 16. So and yeah, and how that can hold you back, and the sort of effects on your mental health and in your physical health. For us, I think especially the last year, yeah, that constant feeling of at any time you can be moved on, you can never quite afford to pay, you can never quite afford to do things, and it really does diminish you as a person. For me, it's culminated this year. So after a series of you know, sort of fairly longest place I stayed. My daughter's now just turned 18. She's lived her whole life in private rented accommodation. That's mouldy. She the place we're in at the moment, we've been here for 3 years. We lived in London. We were priced out of London. I could no longer afford to pay my rent. So I've had to leave my family, my friends. My sister had to move up north, same problem. And so we're just scattered. We've got no community. And so we moved to Suffolk. That was the only place I could afford at the time. And then the pandemic hits, and we're stuck in freezing cold, mouldy accommodation. It's affected my daughter's mental health above all. It failed her all of her exams, and she now has a mould allergy. So it's just that constant fighting to get yourself heard, to be taken seriously. You know, we've been nobody ever really believes. They think you're sort of, you go to the council, try to get rehoused, and they try to look for something privately, and they know full well there's nothing that we can afford. So we got an eviction notice. I've been trying to get repairs done for best part of 2.5 years, including a broken window, hence the mould and the damp and everything. And I was met as soon as in September with an eviction notice. So there's been that sense of panic. Now there's nothing to fall back on. There's nowhere to go. I consider myself lucky, but I've been fighting tooth and nail for the council finally agreed to rehouse us. So we are moving into a council place, and the feeling of relief is just unbelievable, really. Yeah, and it's such a, for some people such a small thing, but for the first time we've got a secure home. So that's yeah, and the worst thing I think for me is that it's perpetuating my daughter. What happens next for her? Yeah, and it's scary. It's always that feeling of, well, we might end up in a hostel or on the street or who knows what. So yeah, so thank you for kicking that one off, Amy, because that's biggest problem started with that the sale of council housing. We end up with nothing at the end of it. So and no social housing. So yeah, I think that's all.
Great, thank you, Louise, for sharing that.
That's okay.
I'm really sorry to hear about that, and I'm really glad to hear how that story ended. And I'm really, to hear
there, but for the grace of God, as they say. But it's taken a battle, and me going along with the Mental Health Act. I've had public health and housing inspecting, and the Equality Act and all kinds of things, and finally they caved in. So yeah.
Great, yeah. Emma, I saw that you. Oh, Suzanne, you've also raised your hand, but Emma, I saw you raise your hand before. Do you still have something to say, or?
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to tell you about my experience. I divorced from my husband, and we had to go into private renting. Me and my little boy. We rented happily this house. For 2 years, paid on time, kept the house really, really nice. And then towards the end of the current lease that I was in, I got a letter saying the landlady wouldn't be renewing because she was selling. And so I thought, oh, that's awful for me, but okay, fair enough. Turned out she wasn't selling. I don't know who concocted that story, but it was what the letting agents were telling me as well. At that particular time, I wasn't working due to ill health and depression. And the landlady knew that I wasn't working when I moved in because I paid 6 months up rent. I paid £9,500 up front to live there. And the long story short was that she had a friend she wanted to move in to the house that I was renting. She sent that friend round under the guise of her buying it, so made me show the house to this woman and her 2 daughters, and they went round every room saying, oh, is that carpet staying? Is that cabinet staying? Oh, I like that bed. And I had to tell her that no, all of that furniture was mine. She took me to court and won. I have no idea why. She issued a section 21 notice, obviously no fault. The council at the time were telling me, obviously, like they tell everyone, stay put. The landlady was saying, well, you'll have to go into a hostel. I don't care whether you have to go into a hostel. You're making my friend homeless. She's already handed her notice in to her previous landlords. And I ended up having to pay my own court costs, her court costs, storage fees, and I was homeless for a relatively short time, but I was still homeless with a 7-year-old. In order to keep him in the school that he was in at that time, I had to drive over 300 miles every single week to keep him in that school. And, you know, that was 4 years ago, and I'm still not over it, because I've gone from a really lovely house that I kept really nice and I loved living there, to a horrible council flat where my neighbours smoke cannabis all the time, and the council can't do anything about it. The police aren't interested. And I am working again now, but I don't earn enough to pay my rent completely without housing benefit. And I'm scared about, the only way of getting out of here, away from the drugs, is to go back private, but no private landlords or letting agents will rent to somebody taking benefits. It's also had an impact on my son, because where the council have placed us, there are no other kids for him to play with. He's away from all his school friends, and he's stuck in his bedroom every day after school. And I know it was 4 years ago, but it still affects me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's normal, but
I think definitely. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sorry you went through that process. I can't believe that the court system, I mean, it's just, yeah, it can feel very isolating at times, I think, the whole housing system, and it can really affect you so personally. So thank you for sharing that. I've seen in the chat people are talking about negotiating rent reductions, which I think we should definitely chat about at some point. But there's two people with their hands raised, so maybe let's just move on to them. But Suzanne, do you wanna go ahead and chat about your experiences?
Wow, hello. I don't quite know how to follow that. That was heart-wrenching. I'm sorry to hear your experience, Katie. So I was really lucky, and I actually grew up in a beautiful house in the countryside. But after that, I spent 10 years in privately rented accommodation, and I've just spent the last 2 in social housing with a housing association. And both the private rented experiences and the social housing experiences have been terrible. And I've experienced harassment in both, landlord harassment, and it's currently going on right now. Again, issues with repairs, complaints being completely ignored. I've had neighbours who haven't had hot water for months on end, and who have also experienced harassment. And I'm just trying to set up a tenants union in my block at the moment, in Newcastle. So I'm trying to get people involved, and hopefully as the pandemic lifts, that will get a bit easier and more people will engage. But yeah, and just what Amy said at the beginning as well about self-esteem and your mental health, it does have a huge impact on you, because especially if you have health issues or other things going on in your life, that constant struggle can be wearing. But yeah, I'm so determined not to let it get the better of me, and to actually get these issues dealt with, and not to be bullied out of my home. Because I'm not a bad tenant, I don't have any issues with antisocial behaviour or rent arrears, so there's no reason that I should be harassed and bullied out of my home, really. Yeah, that's all I can think of right now. I could probably talk for 15 minutes, but I don't want to take away from everyone else. So
no, thank you. That's amazing to hear you're setting up a tenants union. That's incredible. And it's nice to hear about, there are difficulties sometimes, but also there's ways to find solidarity, and there's power in numbers, and that's really, really great to hear.
I'm trying.
Great. Miss Neil, you've raised your hand. Do you want to jump in?
Hi.
Hi.
I'm so sorry. I do not want to show my face because currently I'm dealing with antisocial behaviour.
No worries.
So basically, I've been in my property for about 11, going 12 years. And during that time, I've had 3 children. And the first 6 years was okay. And then after that, it was a nightmare. At the time, I didn't actually realize what I was going through, because I just thought, okay, my neighbors are just banging or banging the door, but I didn't really think anything of it. So when I learned that it was actually antisocial behavior, I contacted my local council. I contacted my landlord, because at this time, my children couldn't even play in the house. They couldn't play in the house. They couldn't even jump up and down, because any sound they made, the neighbors would hear and they would bang. So it got to a point now where my son, who was 1 year old at the time, was tiptoeing in his own house because he was scared of the neighbors. And at night time, I have to keep my lights on because the kids are still scared of the neighbors. Now, I'm on the opposite end of the scale. I was wanted to be evicted from last year. And when that happened, unfortunately, it was at the start of the pandemic. So eviction, was on hold. And I've recently just been served another Section 21 in January, and I'm meant to be out in July. But my question is, I really wish there was a lot more help for people like me who are single and who have vulnerable people at home, because when you're in private renting, you have to go through so much just to get out. And it seems like I've just had so many mental issues because of this. I was fine before because I was working, I was out and about, my kids were at nursery at the time. But now, during the pandemic, I've just literally been, I was trapped inside and having to deal with banging and being sworn at. And it hasn't been a nice experience. So I just would like to say to anyone who's going through this, please just try your best to be strong, because hopefully it all pans out in the end.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Your child sounds very cute in the background.
Yeah, he's not anymore.
Yeah, that's a really, really difficult experience. And again, just sorry to hear about that. But I think you're so right. And hopefully a forum like this, even in a tiny way, is a useful place to kind of hear about other people who are going through that, and kind of receive some support. Does anyone else wanna jump in with something? You can raise your hand digitally, or you can just put it up in the video or whatever.
I think Irina mentioned she wanted to speak. I don't know if she wants to jump in now.
Irina? You're on mute at the moment, Irina.
I'm happy to do it, but my issues, I've been living in private rented for 12 years and listening to other people's stories. I just think my catalogue of issues is nothing to other people. I just thought, because I do really stick up for myself to the point, all right, then I'm going to tell you about a situation where I thought I've had enough and I'm going to fight it. So this situation cost me £3,000. I had to pay my ex-landlord's, part of my ex-landlord's barrister's fees, because I took my landlord to court, my ex-landlord, I should say, because I'd had enough of being trampled on. Problem is with the justice system, you can't get legal aid unless in a housing situation. If you're being made homeless, you can get legal aid. So what happened? I went to court, and my ex-landlord had a barrister. My ex-landlord owns about 8 properties. He's clearly had enough excess income. And I'm only a lay person, and there was no way that I could argue against a barrister. And I asked the judge whether we could resit the case and I go away and get legal advice. So I asked for a few weeks, and I didn't realize I was never going to get free or affordable legal advice. I never got it. I went to the law centre. I tried to find a pro bono lawyer. I even went to a solicitor who wanted £800 up front without me knowing if they could even fight the case for me. And when I went back to court, there was a delay because I never could get this legal representation I was seeking to fight this barrister. And I ended up having to pay my ex-landlord £3,000 towards the barrister's fees. The ex-landlord had to pay £7,000 remaining for the fees. And I just did not feel like I was, I didn't have the skill, but that was me trying to fight back. And somebody asked the question, has anybody been successful with a rent reduction? I have. I did negotiate a 15% rent reduction with my current landlord in a previous property, and in the current property I'm in, if I'm being really honest about this, I'm probably paying 30% less than other people. But then again, I actually renovated the property, and that was part of the deal, you could say, for the effort I put in. So yeah, I really do. I mean, I am now a single person. I am middle-aged, but so as I say, I just feel my problems are nothing compared to other people's. But said my piece, and thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. No, I mean, it's really important, I think, for everyone to feel like, the problems you experience of a renter are still bad, even if there are worse ones out there, because you also don't want to get into a situation where you think, oh, I won't complain about that, or I won't take issue with that, because, it could be so much worse. Like, you deserve to live in good housing, and you deserve not to be exploited. And there is a line. So even though it can get a lot worse, I think it's really important to hear about everyone's stories. Katie, should I pass it over to you?
Hi, yeah, I've rented privately my entire adult life, so about 20 years now. I've had about 8 or 9 different landlords during that time. So in some ways I feel lucky to have so few landlords in 20 years. But I've never had a good landlord. I've heard other people talk about, oh, my landlord's great, they do this, that and the other, and I've never experienced that.
Do they exist? That's the question.
Yes. There is a few that exist, but not many at all. And another issue I've had is many of the landlords I've had live abroad, and they really don't care about the property or anything as long as they're getting the money in. So my current issue with my landlord is he keeps raising my rent every 6 months by £25, which is a lot, and I can't afford it. I'm disabled, I'm unemployed. He knew when I moved in that I was unemployed due to disability, and he accepted that. And the property isn't even ideal for me. There's loads of steps to get in. It's a first floor flat. But at the time I was desperate because I was being evicted by a previous landlord for asking for repairs that desperately needed to be done. I even had the council involved, and the council were demanding that the landlord did these repairs because the place was unsuitable to live. And so the landlord just evicted me, and the council said, oh, never mind, we can't do anything, wait till he evicts you. And he was evicting me at Christmas. So I was like, I can't just wait and do nothing. So I was desperate to find a place. This, I said, is unsuitable because it's got steps, but once I'm in, there's not many steps. So thankfully, there is that. But that does mean some days I'm confined to my house because I can't get out of my house because of going down the stairs. But yeah, as I said, the landlord keeps raising the rent. His excuse is that it's a block of old Victorian houses have all been converted into flats. There's about 15 of these flats. And his excuse is that the other people pay more in rent. And I know they do. I've seen when these places have gone up for rent online, how much the rent is. But I've also seen the pictures, and some of them are great. They've got laminated flooring. They've got, bathrooms that are all in one place. My toilet and my bathroom are separate, so I can't even go to the toilet and wash my hands in the same place. I have to navigate a corridor to be able to wash my hands. So there's like all those issues. And when I moved into this place, the rent was so cheap that I looked past all the problems. There was plug sockets hanging off the wall. There was blood on the walls. All the carpets were completely stained. I looked past that. I spent a whole week just cleaning. There was hundreds of pounds of debts on the key meters that I struggled to try and get written off because nobody seemed to know which supplier supplied the meters because of it being in a block of flats. They were like, well, which one are you? We can't work out. And so there was all that as well. But I looked past that because I was desperate for a place and the rent was really cheap. But he keeps raising it. And I've managed to secure a 12-month tenancy agreement in January because he raised the rent in January again, despite me saying it's been a pandemic, my benefits haven't changed. And, you're telling me that just after Christmas, I've got to pay you more money. And thankfully, the estate agents negotiated that I could have a 12-month tenancy agreement this time. So I've got till January next year before my rent will go up. When it goes up again in January, and I know it will, I can't afford to live here anymore. But with the limited amount of places there are for me to move to, and me not being eligible for social housing, well, I am eligible, but not for anywhere in the local area. And I need to live in this local area for my mental health. Everything I need is in this area, and sort of physical health as well. I'm right by a train station, so I can get around and things like that. And every night I go to bed, even though it's not till January that I have to worry, but every night I go to bed worrying, what am I going to do when it comes to January? Am I going to just pay the extra rent and, have to use my disability payments to go towards that, which means then I might have to eat less. I might have to not use some of the services that I have to use because of my disability, because the payment, instead of going to those services, has to go on rent. Or do I try and move? And, as they were saying, it's a huge toll on your mental health. And when you have mental health problems already, it makes it so much worse. And the constant worry of not knowing where you're going to live, it's a struggle. So I can tell you, I could go on for a whole hour about every single problem I've had with landlords and repairs and rats. And I had a place that was infested with lice. The whole lot. I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, the keyring, the hat, I've got everything when it comes to bad experiences with renting, and there just seems no end in sight. While they can still evict you for no fault of your own, while landlords still can say, no DSS, no pets, while they can still say all this and impose all these strict regulations, and while there's no protection for us, we're stuck.
Yeah. Thank you so much for contributing. You're so right to bring up no fault evictions. And I think, hopefully we can see a silver lining on the horizon that is, we've had, guarantee is probably the wrong word to use, but, we know the government intends to implement no fault or ban no fault evictions. Gen Rent have been doing loads of campaigning on that. And I guess, there's the white paper, which is not ideal in terms of timing, but, if we all think about the years that we've rented, hopefully inevitably there will be more years that we'll be renting, and hopefully we'll be in a world where there is no fault evictions. And I mean, just to say, Katie, God, how greedy of your landlord, and how horrible. And you know, I wish that people just didn't behave like that and I assume he owns multiple properties.
Yeah, he owns the whole block, so he's getting that amount of rent for about 15 households. He did try and sell the whole block last year. He was asking for 1.6 million for the whole place, so that's how much these properties are worth. And he was telling, because I looked up the listing, of course, because I'm sort of nosy like that, wanted to know, and it said how much income he was getting per year from renting, because he said, oh, they're sitting tenants, you'll get them when you buy the property. But I spoke to the estate agents, and they said even though he's selling it with sitting tenants, there is no guarantee the new landlord will keep you on. Thankfully, because of the pandemic, that's the one good thing that's come out of the pandemic. He wasn't able to sell, because who has 1.6 million to spare to buy rental properties when people can't afford to pay their rent? So he's decided not to bother selling anymore. So, for now I'm okay, but just waiting for January and see what happens.
Have you ever spoken to any other tenants in the building?
I've spoken to a couple, yes. And they have similar issues with repairs not being done on time, which is another issue. That's why I'm really scared to complain. The fact my toilet is leaking right now and the water is going everywhere all over the floor, and that's not been fixed, but I'm scared to tell them to hurry up to fix it, because they might decide to give me a no-fault eviction. So yeah, all the other tenants say about the properties not being repaired properly. I know how much they all pay, and they do pay more than me. So I know I'm getting a good deal compared to them, but the fact that my rent has gone up over £100 since I moved in, which is only 2 years ago, just is ridiculous considering the state of the property. So I can see why he wants to make it the same as the others for fairness, but for fairness he should make my property look the same as theirs as well. There seems to be quite a high turnover of tenants at the moment in this place, so he knows he can get someone in because it's a very desirable area, so he knows he could kick me out and get someone else in. So yeah, I'll stop there because I could carry on forever.
I wonder if, no, thank you for adding. Yeah, I wonder if, rent strike is obviously quite a scary thing to take on. But talking to your other tenants in the building and finding out that lots of people share very similar issues, and you are all the guys who pay him, is a powerful position to be in. Even just to
I really think everyone would be too scared to do like a rent strike, or
it's scary. It's scary.
Yeah, I don't think, because some people have lived here many years. They've lived here a lot longer than I have, and it is their home. And I really don't think they would do anything, because they just can't risk it. So as much as I'd like to say we could all band together, I really don't. Plus, I do have issues with antisocial behaviour. It's not really the fault of the people living here that I can hear every single noise. The floors and the walls are so thin. I can hear, my neighbours can probably hear me talking right now because the walls are that thin. I can hear every single conversation everybody has. And while it's not technically antisocial behaviour, it does do my head in that I can hear every single thing.
That is, yeah, I mean, noise is, we haven't even
and there's no privacy for me. I can't, I've had, doctor sessions and things online while I've been at home, and the fact I live alone doesn't mean I have privacy to have medical assessments over the internet. Anyway, that's another issue.
I completely understand, yeah. Well, I'm aware that we're kind of coming up to 10:02, so we can maybe, does anyone else have anything they want to jump in about? Or we could maybe chat a bit about, I think let's take maybe one more, and then we'll chat a bit about rent reductions and kind of those kind of negotiations. Frankie, I see you're raising your hand. Katie, thanks so much for sharing that. Frankie, I can pass it over to you now.
Hello. Yeah, my issue at the moment is that I'm not actually sure where I'm going to be able to live at the moment. I've been living with my elderly mother in what was council housing is now housing estate property. I contacted them about getting on the tenancy. They said mum would have to make the request. I got a form from Action for Carers, which I got mum to sign. I've then sent it off to my housing association people. They've then come back and said, oh, we're sending you out a form. Since then, my mother has died. So I'm kind of hoping that they accept the thing that I sent them, because I'm not going to be able to get anything else signed. So yeah, and we're still waiting to hear back from them to see what's actually going to happen there. So that's all a little bit scary.
I'm sorry to hear about your mum, Frankie. I am sure there are lots of people who can give you advice on that, probably. Probably shelter would be a good place. Or I mean, it sounds like you're already talking to like a care organization.
Yeah, I've got Action for Carers helping.
Yeah.
But yeah. So they could come around and say that, yeah, that's fine for me to stay here, or they could go, no, it's not the official form, it doesn't count. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there seems to be some, extenuating circumstances in that situation. So I feel like people will hopefully be reasonable about it. Obviously, this entire conversation is about how unreasonable so much of this is. But thank you for sharing. And yeah, I'm sorry you're going through that, and I hope it really turns out okay. We could talk briefly. I mean, I guess it's it's hard to find a kind of positive in these stories. That just hearing everyone kind of be so strong and talk about how they're getting through this, and like putting up a fight and like challenging people, I think is really impressive, and being able to just get through it day by day in difficult circumstances. I do think another interesting thing to talk about that a lot of people don't talk about is kind of the agency you might feel you have. Does anyone have any sort of positive stories about negotiating rents or stopping rent increases? It's something I've managed to do personally in a house, and was something I never would have thought I could ever do, and was so scared to do. And then I just had to remember, and obviously it's so individual to your personal circumstance, and also it's a negotiation, so it's just about the power you think you hold, or and who your landlord is. But sometimes you don't ask, you don't get, and it can be an amazing tool. Has anyone had any experiences of that that they thought others might be able to learn from, or that they might want to share in terms of negotiating? Irina, I can pass it over to you, and then maybe Caitlin, you can jump in as well. You're on mute, Irina.
Hi. Yeah, it was a few years ago, and it was I've only been privately renting for 12 years, and it was my third property. And, I did know that landlords were supposed to deal with the repairs. So I was living in a property, was very fed up that he wasn't dealing with repairs. He did live abroad. And I just got so fed up that I didn't renew the tenant agreement and moved out. He was actually approaching me. So I had left, I'd had enough. And then he approached me. He was very keen for me to take it back on. And by this point, a landlord in the building had asked me to manage his property. So I had a bit more knowledge about the roles of lettings agents, etc., and what they charge. So basically, because of that, and because I was in a stronger position, I had somewhere else to live, I negotiated a 15% rent reduction on the basis that a lettings agent can charge up to 15% for renting out a property on behalf of the landlord and managing it. And as I was going to be the person managing the property I'm living in, dealing with repairs, because the landlord never did deal with the repairs, he agreed to that. So that's my story of negotiating a 15% rent reduction.
Thank you for sharing that. It's really interesting. In my house, we sort of manage the property, and you've now made me think maybe that's a good way to get a rent discount.
One other little thing is that private landlords would, I mean, if they're doing it correctly, they would normally have to cost in 6 weeks of void period in a property per year. So whatever your rent is for 6 weeks, perhaps use that as a negotiation tool to say we're long-term tenants, you're not missing out on any rent and void periods because we're ongoing tenants, so you're saving X amount. So that's just 2 pointers, that suggestions I can make to you. But you
that's really helpful.
Okay,
that's it. Caitlin, do you have any sort of gem rent advice that might be helpful for people?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've personally managed to get a rent reduction in the last 12 months, and I've advised some people I know. But I just wanted to point everyone in this webinar to some of the information we have online on rent reductions. But I think the crucial thing to remember is that, like, you as good tenants are valuable to landlords, and landlords act as if tenants are disposable and try their luck. But I think if you're choosing to negotiate a rent with a rent rise, and I understand it's a very personal decision based on how secure you feel, as Irina said, most good landlords would rather have someone they know is going to pay rent, someone they know is not going to wreck the property, and someone they know is going to stay there for a long time. And at the moment, due to COVID, rents in some cities are going down, so it's harder to get other people in. And another thing that is really important to bear in mind is that the landlord lobby have been saying over and over again throughout this crisis, oh, the court system takes ages, we can't get any tenants to leave. So even though the eviction ban is ended, even though Section 21 still exists, which needs to go because it would make negotiating so much easier, you as sitting tenants are in a stronger position than it might feel like sometimes. And I think lots of landlords capitalize on the fact that tenants don't know this. So a landlord trying their luck, hit with an email saying that this is how much rent is for other areas, other properties in the area, this is, I've always paid my rent on time, you don't want to deal with a void period, etc., can be really powerful. And I've seen someone mention Acorn in the chat. Their London Renters Union as well I know not everyone here will be London based, but they have template letters to send that you can send your landlord. I think that there is a real power in knowing what your value is, like as a good tenant, and fighting back where possible. Whether or not there's a tenant union in your area, there are resources that everyone can download. So I'll make sure that we get those to everyone after this.
Great, thanks. That was really, really useful. I completely echo that. Like, yeah, landlords, they pretend like it's really easy to just get another tenant, but it's expensive and it's like a pain in the ass. So the fact that you can just be like a consistent, reliable, communicative tenant, and what they do, they don't put the rent up, or like they put the rent slightly down, is probably like worth their money, to be honest. So yeah, really, really helpful advice. Does anyone else have any? Suzanne, you raised your hand. Do you have any thoughts on this?
No, I was just going to mention Acorn as a potential organisation to contact. So I just put it in the chat. Yeah, it's worth contacting them.
Amazing, thanks. Yeah, my experience of personally personally negotiating a rent decrease. I was so surprised that we went a lot bigger than I thought, and in the end we managed to get a 30% discount, and it was just for a period of time when the landlord was it's a very boring story about a party wall dispute, but basically they knocked down our garden because of the house next door. But anyway, I think had I not Googled it or spoken to other people, I would have just been like, oh, there's nothing I can do, I don't own this property. But we managed to get a really big discount during the time. So sometimes I think the worst case scenario is they say, no, and you say, okay, you know, like no one's going to evict you for asking. Well, I probably can't say that, but hopefully no one would evict you for just asking for slightly lower rent, because that would be kind of insane. Well, we're kind of coming up towards the end. Does anyone have any sort of final, very quick thoughts they might want to say, like, you know, helpful advice that people have found? And there's loads of stuff I can see in the chat that seems really helpful. And I can sort of pass it over to Caitlin, maybe to close and just say a bit about how people can be more involved with stuff. Miss Neil, do you want to just quickly jump in there?
Oh, hi. Yes,
Hi.
I was just going to say that if anyone is dealing with antisocial behaviour, please report it to the police. Like every single time, just report it to the police, call your council and find out who is who's in charge of the antisocial behavioural unit at your local council. But just keep on reporting it just in case anything goes wrong. Well, it's going wrong already anyway because you're dealing with antisocial behaviour. But if anything gets more serious and you're feeling extremely threatened, then you have a record of it. That's it.
That was a really great piece of advice. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, bye.
Thank you. Cool. Okay, well, it is 7 p.m, so we can call it there. Caitlin, do you have any final words, just like how people can get involved if they're interested?
Yeah, I'll keep it really, really quick. Thank you to everyone who shared their experience today. I mean, hearing those stories, I think Ruby's right. There's some of them, I mean, they're all just demonstrate the need for change, and it's difficult to think of a positive, but I'm going to try to. And I think it's really valuable to kind of listen from other people and work out what you're feeling, like what you're going through. You're not alone, and that there is a reason why housing is this bad, because that means we can fix it, means it can change. And so I'd be really keen, you know, for this not to be the last time that we talk about this, and to kind of keep the momentum going. And if there is a way that, so I just want to end on a few ways that you can get involved in our campaign, because I think these experiences are so powerful, and they are so valuable in campaigning for change and to make things better. So yeah, if you would like to, we'd love for you to stay involved. You can sign up at generationrent.org. The link is on there, and we'll email it to you after. If any of you want to join our Renter Spokesperson Network, which is people who speak to journalists on our behalf, about their experiences, only good journalists like Ruby, we'd never put you in front of someone horrible. You can also join our Renters Panel, which is where we ask renters to test out new ideas and give feedback on new policy ideas that might work or might not work. You can volunteer as well, and yeah, the last ask is a donate button, and I know that, you know, as a donation ask, and I feel like there's a lot of you won't be in a position to do so, and you know, if there's, and especially at the moment with the pandemic, but if there's any way that you can spare, any way that you can support our work, we'd be very, very grateful. I think it's just, yeah, it's been really, really useful to hear all your stories, and I hope that some of you found it either therapeutic to vent, or that there's some useful information that you've got out of this. And we'll be sending around our fact sheets with advice on what to do about arrears, about rent increases and things like that. But yeah, I think, you know, solidarity to all, and thank you very much for your time. And yeah, yes. Katie says better out than in. I think sometimes, yeah, that's definitely true. But yeah, thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. You know, feel free to reach out to me as well. I'm on Twitter, or my email's on Twitter as well, if you ever need to speak to a journalist or want to speak to a journalist about your story. So yeah, without further ado, thank you. Best of luck and goodbye.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.